Hello and welcome to the first in a series of conversations looking at the impacts of the coronavirus on our communities. We'll be looking a little bit about how it affects the country, but more specifically Virginia, as well as the Peninsula area and Greater Hampton Roads. I'm Ryan Gilchrist, an editor and journalist from Yorktown, Virginia. Before we get started today, I do want to introduce my co-host. She is currently executive in residence at Hampton University and a former newspaper editor and publisher, Marisa Porto. Marisa, can you tell us a little bit about the intent of these conversations and what we're trying to accomplish here?
Certainly. I've been having a lot of conversations with people in the community, government officials, education officials, community officials about, what's happening with the coronavirus. And the conversations revolve really about the now, what's happening currently. There's a little bit of conversation about recovery, but there really hasn't been any conversation about the long-term effects of this in Hampton Roads, which is where we are at, also in Virginia and then across the nation. So I wanted to put together a series of conversations, in particular with particular organizations, to talk a little bit about what they see in their space. And so that's why we're here today.
Thank you. Let me introduce our guests. So today we have with us Kathryn Strickland. She's the Chief Network Officer for Feeding America. According to their LinkedIn page, the largest network of food banks, pantries, and meal programs in the country. Kathryn, thank you so much for joining us.
We're delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And we also have Joyner, CEO of the Virginia Peninsula Foodbank, who has been very busy lately, and we'll look forward to hearing a little bit about that. Karen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Marisa, we've got a couple of experts on the line. What do you want to know?
Well, let's start with a scene setter so people know where you're at today. Tell us a little bit, Karen, about what you're seeing in the community and the need that you're seeing today.
Okay, so generally we work through a network of partner agencies up and down the Greater Virginia Peninsula, 9 cities and counties. And our network encompasses about 140 partner agencies in addition to our own direct service programs. About 20% of our partner agencies have closed in the past month due to the fact that they are manned by volunteers and often older volunteers, and so for their safety or because they're attached to a church. Most of our partner agencies happen to be church food pantries. When the church closes down, a lot of them have to close down. So part of our infrastructure is missing at this time, and so the food bank has been trying to pick up some of that, I won't call it slack, but pick up some of that need. And so we've been distributing through drive-through mobile pantries where we take enough food out into different spots in the community to serve about 400 households, because that's about all we can manage at a time using 6 trucks for that one distribution. We need to keep the other trucks on the road, picking up food donations, making deliveries to the partner agencies that are still open. And in these mass food distributions that we've been doing, we have collected statistics on who we're serving, and we found that approximately 68% of the individuals who are showing up to these drive-through mobile pantries, as we call them, are new to the food bank or to our partner agencies. It's a software to capture that information, and if they're not in our software, that means they haven't been to one of our mobile pantries or one of our partner agencies in the past 2 years, which is how long we've been using this particular software. So that's pretty eye-opening. Going into these mass drive-through distributions, I frankly thought that some of the same people that we were serving through our partner agencies were going to get in line for this food as well, but we're seeing less of that than I thought. So these are new faces of hunger. These are new faces of food insecurity. People who may not have ever heard of the food bank before. They were our donors, and now they're on the other side, and I know they appreciate what we do. We get a lot of thank yous and a lot of great notes, and I won't cry about that right now, but it's very important that we serve this new population because there's just so many unemployed or at least temporarily laid off individuals in our community. And that's why we're trying to supplement what our partner agencies are doing by doing these mass food distributions.
That's an amazing number of new people using your services. I wonder, Kathryn, is that a similar experience that you all are having?
So yes, I mean, the experience that Karen described on the ground in Virginia is what we are seeing nationally. And even in the best of times, you know, food banks are serving people who, for example, I used to run a food bank in Alabama, in the northern part of the state. And, you know, one gentleman shared with me his story and how he had just been laid off after 30 years of working at one company, and shared with me in this small church in a very small town in Walker County, Alabama, that this pantry was keeping him from starving. And that's in the best of times. And so now with the pandemic, Feeding America and our partners, food banks across the nation, are sort of hit with the perfect storm. So on one regard, we rescue millions and millions of pounds of food per year that would needlessly go to waste in landfills. And instead, our network of innovative food banks are able to capture this food and give it to families in need. And in this case, because of the run on the grocery stores, there really hasn't been the surplus to donate. So our food donations are down. And at the same time, as Karen described, the need has spiked tremendously. So in Karen's case in Virginia, you know, y'all are looking at a 68% increase in demand, you know, just when our food supplies are decreasing. And then, you know, as community-based organizations, we rely heavily on volunteers to help us inspect, pack, and distribute the food that we have available. And in the time of social distancing, you know, a lot of the volunteer base has certainly curtailed. So these are the challenges, sort of this trifecta of challenges that we're facing. And I'm just so proud to call Karen and her team at the food bank to be able to call them my colleagues, because we are having to innovate in real time and meet this demand under, you know, very challenging circumstances. So in case what Karen is describing, you know, drive-through distribution so that we're honoring social distancing and following CDC protocols. We are actively looking and building relationships with new food partners that we haven't, you know, that maybe are new to us, so that we can access the food supplies that are available, such as the dairy and certain proteins that we're able to tap into, and relying upon really the federal government, because the scale of this pandemic, every food bank in the nation is faced with this simultaneously. And so a key partner in this will be the federal government, and allowing us to tap into resources in collaboration with FEMA and USDA and other government agencies. So, you know, that kind of gives you like a real snapshot of what's happening, and at the same time, how, you know, food banks are activators. We are all about action, and how, you know, we're stepping forward in order to meet this need and ensure that every neighbor has food that they need to rely upon in the wake of this pandemic.
That's amazing. Can you talk a little bit about, you said FEMA and government help, just a little bit about that space there. It seems like there's an opportunity maybe down the road for you all.
Sure, and I invite Karen to join in and describe what's happening locally in Virginia. So food banks have a long-time partnership with the USDA, and there's a wonderful program that in normal times identifies surpluses that American farmers have, and will purchase those surpluses in order to stabilize prices for farmers, to ensure that what happened in the Great Depression, where we lost so many family farms, we don't incur that tragedy again. And they buy those foods and then make them available to food banks across the country. And so in this time of great need, the USDA and Congress has stepped in to provide additional resources to that program, so that food banks can access a greater supply of the foods that we need. The challenge is that there's a gap between when those foods will arrive. So those foods will probably arrive sort of in the June and July timeframe, whereas Karen and her staff at Food Bank in the Virginia Peninsula is faced with just lines of people in need of food today. And so that's what we're here to solve for. And so sort of unlocking some flexibilities and inviting the aid of FEMA can help us in this moment. Karen, do you want to add to this?
Sure. Just a little perspective over the last year or so at Virginia Peninsula Foodbank. Normally, we, on a normal year prior to last year, say about 12% of our inventory comes through the USDA product. But last year, because of the tariffs that have been put on a lot of products, we have what we've been calling trade mitigation food from the USDA. And this is just excess food that's coming in that they can't export, basically. And we have been getting more and more and more and more and more of this food. And our warehouse has been busting at the seams with all of this food that, unfortunately, there are parameters in place, restrictions regarding the distribution of that food, where only individuals at 150% of poverty or below can access that food, and they can only access that food once a month. So that's why our inventory had been building up, so that most of the inventory that we have in our warehouse at one time was USDA food, because unfortunately our donated food inventory has been down significantly over the past year or so. From February to February, our donated food inventory has been down 30%. So we started from a very low point of donated inventory, but we in Virginia were very, very fortunate that we had people fighting for us to get that special permission for a waiver to use the USDA food for disaster purposes, because make no mistake, we're in the middle of a disaster. So we got a temporary waiver from USDA to distribute the TFAP commodities, which is that USDA food, as disaster distribution. So lo and behold, we're actually very fortunate because we have a lot of that food, and now we're able to distribute it every 2 weeks, and it can go to everybody in our line. We don't have to check their income or anything. And so we've been using that food for these mass food distributions. Now, our declaration of this waiver was only dated for a month. It was something like March 28th to April 28th. So we're going to have to go back to the USDA and ask them to extend it. And hopefully that's not going to be a problem at this point. But it took a lot of work by the executive director of our State Association of Food Banks to get that declaration, that waiver from the USDA. So right now we are sitting on probably 80% of all the food that we have is TFAP or USDA food, but that's going out very, very, very quickly. Sure. So we had just ordered about 7 truckloads of purchased food to supplement that and to make up for that difference should that waiver go away, or knowing that this whole situation is not going to be figured out in the next month or two. There's going to be long-term effects, and we're going to have purchased food here because we're not getting enough donated food in.
So I have a question for both of you, but Kathryn, I'm going to ask you first because I know you have to step off for another appointment here in just a moment. So you talked about, Karen, the volunteer issue and the labor issue in this time when you need more help than ever. Are there things you're seeing that you're thinking forward in the future about how would we address this? How would we address this in the future, given that this particular incident sort of exposed a weakness, in your volunteer force? What thoughts have you had along those lines?
Well, we've been very fortunate, and Karen, she can speak to what's happening on the ground in Virginia. So in many cases, the National Guard has been activated, and there's been just really positive and strong collaboration in many states, so Louisiana, Ohio, California, New York, in Westchester, which is where one of the first containment communities actually exists due to the pandemic. And without the support of the National Guard, our response would have been severely curtailed. And in the wake of that, we are forging new and exciting partnerships with organizations that we hadn't been connected to previously. So one of them being an amazing nonprofit called Team Rubicon, which is made up of retired military personnel who deploy to disaster areas to aid. And in this case, we believe that our partnership with Team Rubicon will not only help us in this moment, however, it will, we're very hopeful that it will extend into the future. So those are just some of the amazing and heartening partnerships that have been birthed in this response.
And
So
Karen, before you answer, Kathryn, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, Karen, tell us more.
Sure. So my staff was concerned about having volunteers in our building, people they didn't know. We would have 50, 60, 70 volunteers coming in and out of our building every week. And so based on their concern and for the safety of them, as well as to ensure that we can be operating long into the future, that nobody gets sick here, we closed the food bank to volunteers about the third week in March. And because of that, the staff has been doing these little packing parties where we are taking the food that volunteers normally pack into boxes and bags for us, and we're doing the packing, which is very time consuming. And because we have a small staff, it takes a lot of effort. Just recently, we found a location around the corner where we could have volunteers go and pack boxes for us. So that has kind of saved us. And they are packing boxes just around the corner from the food bank using volunteer labor. The other place we use a lot of volunteers and are consistently using those volunteers are out at those drive-through mobile pantries. And as soon as we put one of those on our website, asking for volunteers, all of those spots fill up very quickly. I think there is a very great demand by people to come back to the food bank and volunteer, but there's limited opportunity. So when they see a volunteer opportunity that they can do, they snatch it up. We have considered, because we can't keep up with these 400 box or more food distributions by ourselves, we have considered the fact that down the road, we will probably have to ask for help from National Guard or Team Rubicon. But we would do that as a state association. There are 6 food banks in the state of Virginia, as well as a branch of the Capital Area Food Bank from DC. and we all work together through the Federation of Virginia Foodbanks. So when we have a request that affects all of us, we go through the state association because it packs a bigger POW or WOW or whatever you want to call it. And it makes a bigger impact to the government. But as Kathryn said, I've seen news stories after news stories of Ohio, San Antonio, San Diego, and they are using National Guard to help them with food distributions where they serve, believe it or not, San Antonio served 10,000 individuals at one food distribution. That's unbelievable. They would have used up our entire inventory for that one distribution because they're so much bigger than we are. But we're going to need help to do that going forward. We're just waiting, to do as much as we can while we can.
So, Karen, can you tell us a little bit about what you see from a recovery standpoint? There's this discussion right now about, opening up certain states, and Virginia's not one of them just yet, but at some point it will be. What does that look like for you when that happens in the next, 3 months, 6 months, maybe even a year? What do you see happening at the food bank?
Well, sadly, I think that a lot of the people who have been laid off or have lost their job are not going to get their jobs back. We have a very large percentage of food insecure people on the Virginia Peninsula already, and we have a high concentration of tourism up in Williamsburg, James City County, a little bit in Hampton, but there are a lot of, unfortunately, low-paying jobs relating to the hospitality and tourism industry that probably will not come back. And so, we're going to have to be ready to serve those people who weren't in our line prior to last month for the foreseeable future, whether that's 6 months down the road or a year down the road. We received a phone call a couple of weeks ago from a young lady who had said she needed food assistance because she was working 3 part-time jobs and she got laid off from all 3 of them. Yeah. So that's happening over and over again. And I don't mean to be a pessimist, but I just don't see how all of those jobs are going to come back. Right. So that's why we need to be operating for the foreseeable future. And I don't see this getting better within the next year at a minimum. So
any thought to what happens after that, 2-3 years down the road? Do you still expect there to be this sort of long tail of need, if you will?
I would hope not, but I'm sure that what we're going to see is worse than what it was 2 months ago. For instance, the overall percentage of people who don't know what their meal is, where their meal is coming from, and that's called food insecurity. For the cities and counties that we serve, overall, it was 13.2% of everybody who's a resident of those 9 cities and counties. I can see that going up to 20% for a few years before it settles back down. Maybe I need rose-colored glasses, but I just don't see it getting better for a few years.
Right. What does that mean for your organization then? I mean, if you see that down the road, 6 months, a year, even 2 or 3, that you're going to have this significant need continue for a period of time, what does that mean for your organization?
Well, I'll be an optimist and I'll say that I hope that all the press that has been talking about food banks and what we do and how important what we do is to individuals, I hope that has lasting effect, and that people who maybe hadn't considered what the food bank does understand now what we do. We're certainly seeing it in our monetary donations right now. We're getting all kinds of wonderful notes from people, saying, God bless you, keep your staff safe, we really appreciate you. And so I'm hoping that these new donors that we're seeing support us going through the future, into the future, as long as the need is greater than it is right now or a month ago. Hopefully the need's not much greater than it is right now, but who knows in another month.
Right. Well, we hope those folks continue to donate to you and that you continue to do, you know, good work with all of that. I mean, you've done amazing work. Your team has done amazing work. I can't thank you enough for being here and sharing that with us, sharing your time. I know how busy you are. So thank you again.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Marisa. Before we go, Karen, tell people how they can help. How can they reach you?
Sure. They can go to our website, which is hrfoodbank.org. And if they want to donate money or funds, there's a place on the website where they can donate. If they want to donate food, we are still accepting food. We quarantine any food that comes in for 72 hours, but they can still donate food, and we'll just, you know, keep it where it is for 72 hours before we distribute it to our partner agencies. Or if they still want to volunteer, they can go to the volunteer tab on our website and look at our volunteer opportunities, which is basically going to be comprised of our drive-through mobile pantries and packing boxes specifically right now. We used to have more volunteer opportunities, of course, but we are just focused on getting those boxes packed.
Thank you.
So time, money, and food is what makes the food bank work.
Okay. So thank you
you
all for watching this. We appreciate your time. Marisa, thank you. I'll see you next time. We'll see hopefully everyone else next time as well for the next community conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.